I'm Margaret Collins, 58, and I just watched my son David dismiss me as someone who doesn't matter at his wedding reception in front of 200 guests. What he doesn't know is that for the past 15 years, I've been the anonymous silent partner, funding his entire empire through a shell company I created. Every business loan, every expansion, every brilliant decision he's made, it was all possible because of the $2.3 million I've quietly invested in his success, while he stood there in his $5,000 tuxedo, laughing with his new wife about how I'm just a retired secretary living off Dad's pension. I realized it was time he learned exactly who's been pulling the strings behind his precious business empire. Tomorrow, I'm calling my lawyer to dissolve our partnership agreement. Like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family. The Fairmont Grand Ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and white roses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I sat at table 12, not table 1, with the immediate family, not even table 2 with the close relatives, but table 12 with David's old college roommate's parents and some distant cousins I'd met twice in my life. The guest list in my purse, printed on cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing, told the story of who mattered in my son's new life. Sarah's parents at the head table, her siblings at table 2, her college sorority sisters scattered throughout the front tables, and me, Margaret Collins, mother of the groom, relegated to the social equivalent of Siberia. I watched David take the microphone, his face glowing with champagne and happiness. My heart swelled despite everything. He looked so handsome in his tailored tuxedo, so confident and successful. For a moment, I forgot about the seating arrangement and just felt proud. I want to thank everyone for being here on the most important day of my life, David began, his voice carrying across the room. Sarah and I are so grateful to have all of you, our family and friends, here to celebrate with us. He paused, scanning the room with that $1 million smile that had charmed investors and clients for years. You know, they say it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a community to build a dream. I want to thank everyone who believed in me when I was just a guy with a crazy idea and a laptop in my garage. The crowd chuckled appreciatively. I leaned forward, waiting for him to acknowledge how I'd supported him through those early days, how I'd encouraged him when he wanted to quit his corporate job, how my beautiful wife Sarah, who saw my potential when I was eating ramen noodles and working 18-hour days, my incredible in-laws, Robert and Patricia, who welcomed me into their family and whose business wisdom has been invaluable. He raised his glass toward the head table, where Sarah's parents beamed with pride. My chest tightened. I waited. To my business partner Jake, who took a risk on a startup nobody else believed in. To my mentor Professor Williams, who taught me that failure is just another word for learning. And to all of you who invested in our company, who became our first customers, who spread the word about what we were building. The applause grew louder. People at my table were clapping politely, but I could barely hear it over the rushing in my ears. He was thanking investors. He was thanking customers. He was thanking his college professor. I'm a self-made man, David continued, his chest puffing with pride. But I didn't make myself alone. Every person in this room has contributed to the success story you see before you. Sarah's mother Patricia leaned over to the woman next to her. I recognized her as Sarah's aunt, and whispered something that made them both laugh. The aunt glanced in my direction, and I caught the tail end of their conversation. Just a retired secretary living off her husband's pension. Sweet woman. But she doesn't really understand David's world. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sweet woman. Doesn't understand living off a pension. If only they knew that the pension they were dismissing had generated more wealth in the past 15 years than David's entire business was worth. If only they knew that their golden boy's success story was built on a foundation I had carefully, quietly, anonymously constructed. David raised his glass higher. So here's to everyone who matters. Everyone who helped build this dream. Everyone who believed in us from the beginning. Everyone who matters. I looked around the room, at the faces glowing with champagne and reflected candlelight, at the designer dresses and custom suits, at the society crowd that had embraced my son and his new wife. Not one of them knew the truth. Not one of them understood that the man they were toasting owed his empire to the woman they'd seated at table 12. As the applause died down and David moved into his romantic speech about Sarah, I quietly slipped my phone from my purse and typed a text to my attorney, Jonathan. We need to meet first thing Monday morning. It's time to dissolve the MC Holdings partnership. It's time my son learned exactly who's been funding his dreams. But what I discovered when I got home that night would change everything I thought I knew about my son's gratitude. 15 years ago, David sat across from me at my kitchen table, his laptop open, and his face etched with desperation. The LLC formation documents spread between us told a story of ambition. Colliding with reality, he had the vision, the business plan, the technical skills, but zero capital and credit. That was worse than non-existent after his college debt and a failed attempt at starting a consulting firm right out of graduation. Mom, I know this sounds crazy, he said, running his hands through his hair the way he'd done since he was 5 years old, and trying to explain why he'd broken something. But I really think this software could change everything. The market analysis shows there's a huge gap for small business inventory management systems that integrate with e-commerce platforms. I listened as he walked me through his presentation for the 100th time, watching his eyes light up as he described user interfaces and database architectures and revenue projections. At 25, he had the enthusiasm of youth and the sharp intelligence of his father. But what he lacked was what every dreamer lacks at the beginning: someone willing to bet on them. The thing is, he continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, I need about $200,000 to really do this right. Get proper servers, hire a couple of developers, pay for the licensing and legal stuff. I've applied to 12 banks, Mom, 12. They all say the same thing. Come back when you have collateral or 3 years of profitable business history. I poured him another cup of coffee and studied the documents he'd prepared. David had always been meticulous, even as a child. His business plan was thorough, his market research solid, his financial projections conservative but promising. What struck me wasn't just the quality of his work, but the quiet desperation in his voice. I could get a job tomorrow, he said, closing the laptop with a soft click. Thompson Industries called yesterday. They want me back as a senior analyst. Great salary, benefits, the whole corporate package. But Mom, if I take that job, this dies. This idea that could help thousands of small businesses, that could create jobs, that could actually matter, it dies. I'd been widowed for 3 years by then, and in those 3 years, I'd learned things about money and investing that would have shocked my late husband Richard. The secretary's pension everyone assumed I lived on was real, but it was barely enough to cover groceries. What they didn't know was that I'd taken the life insurance money and Richard's retirement savings and turned them into something substantial through careful investments in tech stocks and real estate. While my friends were learning to live on fixed incomes, I was learning to read quarterly reports and analyze market trends. While they were clipping coupons, I was building a portfolio that had grown from Richard's $400,000 life insurance payout into nearly $1.8 million in assets. But I'd never told anyone, not my sister, not my neighbors, not even David. There was something powerful about being underestimated, about moving through the world while people made assumptions about your limitations. It gave me freedom to make decisions without unwanted advice or requests for loans. Looking at my son across that kitchen table, I made the most important financial decision of my life. What if you had an anonymous investor? I asked quietly. David's head snapped up. What do you mean? What if someone believed in your vision enough to provide the capital? but wanted to remain completely silent. No board seat, no operational input, just a financial partnership with a share of the profits. His eyes widened. Do you know someone, Mom? If you have connections, I know you worked at the insurance company for 30 years, but I held up my hand to stop him. David, what I'm about to tell you must remain completely confidential. Not because it's illegal or unethical, but because it's private. Can you give me your word? He nodded, leaning forward with the intensity of someone glimpsing salvation. I want to be your anonymous partner. Through a holding company I'll provide the capital you need. In return, I'll take a 40% stake in the business. You'll maintain majority control and operational authority. The holding company will be listed as MC Holdings. The lawyers will handle all the paperwork. To maintain privacy, David stared at me for a full 30 seconds. Mom, you can't be serious. You don't have that kind of money. You live comfortably, but $200,000 David. I have the money. More importantly, I believe in you. But there are conditions. First, no one can know I'm the investor. Not your friends, not your future business partners, not even your girlfriend. This has to remain completely confidential. Second, all communication about the business arrangement goes through my attorney. And third, if you ever publicly claim to be entirely self-made, our partnership ends immediately. I watched the emotions play across his face: confusion, hope, suspicion, gratitude. Finally, he reached across the table and took my hands. Mom, I don't know what to say. This is incredible. But why the secrecy? Why not just be a regular investor? I squeezed his hands and smiled. Because someday, when you're successful and people are trying to figure out how you did it, you'll appreciate having someone in your corner who chose to believe in you when nobody else would. Someone who didn't need credit or recognition, just the satisfaction of watching you succeed. 3 weeks later, MC Holdings was officially established, and my son's empire began to rise. The bank transfer records tell a story that would shock anyone who thinks they know my son's rise to success. Over 15 years, the numbers grew from that initial $200,000 investment to a staggering $2.3 million in anonymous funding. Each transfer was carefully timed, strategically planned, and completely invisible to everyone except David's accountant, who knew only that MC Holdings was a reliable and generous partner. Year 1 was about survival. David's software launched with modest success, but the real breakthrough came when a major retail chain expressed interest in licensing his inventory system. The only problem? They wanted customization that would cost another $150,000 in development. When David called the emergency board meeting with his single employee and his attorney, I watched through my lawyer as MC Holdings approved the additional funding within 24 hours. I remember David calling that night, his voice shaking with excitement and relief. Mom, you're not going to believe this. My silent partner just approved the additional funding for the retail deal. We're going to make it. We're actually going to make it. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said, stirring soup on my stove while my son celebrated his salvation. Never, knowing I'd spent the afternoon moving money from my municipal bonds to make his dreams possible. Year 3 brought the first major expansion. David wanted to hire a team of 12 developers and move from his garage to a real office space. The numbers were intimidating: $400,000 for the first year alone. When he presented the plan to MC Holdings through our lawyers, I spent 3 sleepless nights analyzing cash flow projections and market forecasts. But watching him present his vision with such passion and intelligence, I knew this was my son becoming the man he was meant to be. The transfer went through on a Tuesday. David signed the lease on his first real office on Friday. By year 5, we weren't just funding operations, we were funding empire building. David identified 3 smaller companies that, if acquired, would give him vertical integration and eliminate 2 major competitors. The price tag was $800,000. For most investors, This would have required board meetings, committee approvals, extensive due diligence periods. For me, it required one conversation with my financial advisor and a transfer that took 3 business days. I started attending industry conferences, not as David's mother, but as a woman interested in technology investments. I sat in hotel ballrooms, listening to panels about digital transformation and software as a service business models. I subscribed to trade publications and learned to read technical specifications the way I once read insurance policies. When David's biggest competitor tried to poach his development team with signing bonuses and equity packages, MC Holdings funded a retention program that not only kept his employees, but attracted talent from across the industry. When a patent troll threatened to sue over David's core technology, our legal fund ensured he had the best intellectual property attorneys money could buy. The most satisfying investment came in year 8. David had been invited to pitch his expanded platform to a consortium of Fortune 500 companies. It was the kind of opportunity that could transform his regional success into national dominance. The only catch, he needed to demonstrate scalability by processing data loads 50 times larger than his current capacity. The infrastructure upgrade would cost $600,000 and needed to be completed in 6 weeks. I remember sitting in my living room that evening, reading his formal request to MC Holdings. His projections showed that landing even 2 of the consortium companies would generate $50 million in revenue over 5 years, but more than the numbers. I could read between the lines of his carefully professional language. This was his chance to play in the big leagues, to prove that his small company could compete with the industry giants. The money was transferred the next morning. 6 weeks later, David's presentation to the consortium was flawless. His platform handled their stress tests without breaking a sweat. He signed contracts with 4 of the 7 companies that same week. But perhaps the most important transfer wasn't about business expansion. It was about personal growth. In year 10, David met Sarah. She was everything I wanted for him. Intelligent, ambitious, from a good family. She was also expensive. Her lifestyle expectations included vacations in Europe, a house in the right neighborhood, a wedding that would impress her social circle. When David confided to his silent partner that he wanted to maintain majority ownership while also funding a lifestyle that would make Sarah happy, MC Holdings discreetly purchased some of his competitors' intellectual property and then licensed it back to David's company. The arrangement generated enough passive income to fund his personal life without diluting his business equity. Sarah never knew that her engagement ring, their down payment on the house in Maple Grove, and their honeymoon in Tuscany were all made possible by a woman she'd dismissed as just a secretary living off her husband's pension. By year 15, David's company was processing transactions for over 2,000 businesses and employing 47 people. Industry magazines featured him on their covers as a self-made success story. Business schools invited him to speak about entrepreneurship and bootstrapping. Venture capital firms courted him for acquisition deals worth tens of millions. Through it all, MC Holdings remained the anonymous foundation that made everything possible. Every major decision, every expansion, every crisis overcome, none of it would have happened without the woman who chose to believe in her son's dream and fund it from the shadows. The bank records show wire transfers, but they don't show the pride I felt watching David grow from an anxious young man with a laptop into a confident business leader. They don't show the satisfaction of seeing him hire employees, create jobs, and build something meaningful. They don't show how it felt to be the invisible hand guiding his success while he got all the credit. But they also don't show how it felt to watch him accept that credit as if it were entirely his own, or how much it hurt to realize that in building his empire, I'd somehow made myself irrelevant to the very person I'd sacrificed everything to support. The real financial portfolio hidden in my home office safe would shock anyone who believes the retired secretary living off her husband's pension story. While Sarah's friends discuss their husbands' investment portfolios at charity luncheons, while they compare their financial advisors and debate market strategies, I quietly manage assets that dwarf most of their combined wealth. The pension they reference so dismissively does exist, $1,847 per month from 32 years at Metropolitan Insurance. It covers my grocery bill and utilities, nothing more. What they don't see is the municipal bond portfolio worth $3.2 million. The diversified stock holdings that have grown to $4.8 million, and the real estate investments across 3 states that generate $18,000 monthly in rental income. When Richard died 12 years ago, people expected me to struggle financially. A secretary's widow, they thought, would need help managing money, would require guidance from the men in the family, would probably have to downsize and live modestly. They offered well-meaning advice about budgeting on a fixed income and suggested I move to a smaller apartment. Instead, I spent 6 months learning everything I could about investing. I read every book in the library's financial section. I subscribed to the Wall Street Journal and Barron's. I attended free seminars at the local community college about retirement planning and investment strategies. While my friends were learning to clip coupons, I was learning to read 1OK reports and analyze dividend yields. The transformation began with Richard's $400,000 life insurance payout. Everyone expected me to put it in a savings account earning 2% interest, maybe buy some safe CDs. Instead, I opened accounts with 3 different investment firms and began building a portfolio that would generate real wealth. My first major success came from recognizing the potential in technology stocks before they became mainstream. In 2008, while everyone was panicking about the financial crisis, I was buying shares of companies like Apple and Google at fire sale prices. When others were selling in fear, I was accumulating positions in businesses I believe would define the future. The real estate investment started small, a duplex in a college town that I bought for $89 and now rents for $2,400 monthly. The property has appreciated to $340,000 while generating steady income for 8 years. Success bred confidence, and confidence led to more opportunities. Today, I own 11 rental properties across Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But the crown jewel of my financial empire isn't stocks or real estate, it's the network of limited partnerships and private investments I've built over the years. While everyone assumes I'm financially naive, I've been quietly participating in private equity deals, angel investing in startups, and providing bridge financing to growing companies. The irony is that David's business success story pales in comparison to my own. His company is worth approximately $8 million based on recent industry valuations. My total net worth, accumulated through careful investing and strategic business partnerships, exceeds $12 million. Yet, at family gatherings, I listen to Sarah's father Robert lecture about diversification and risk management while I nod politely and ask simple questions that reinforce their assumption that I don't understand complex financial concepts. When Sarah's mother Patricia mentions their financial advisor's latest recommendations, I smile and comment that it all sounds very sophisticated, as if I couldn't manage their entire portfolio with one hand tied behind my back. The deception isn't malicious, it's protective. Wealth changes how people interact with you. When family members know you have money, every conversation becomes a potential solicitation. Every invitation carries the suspicion that they might want something. Every family crisis becomes an opportunity for them to suggest you should help financially. More importantly, invisibility gives me freedom. When no one knows you have resources, no one questions how you spend your time or judges your choices. I can take month-long trips to Europe, that I tell people were affordable group tours, when they were actually first-class adventures. I can drive a modest Honda while owning 3 luxury cars that I keep in a private garage across town. I can live in my comfortable but unremarkable house while owning a vacation home in the mountains that no one in my family has ever seen. The financial privacy also protects my business relationships. When I provide capital to growing companies, they evaluate my investment proposals based on merit, not on preconceived notions about a widowed secretary's financial sophistication. My gender and age would be obstacles in many business contexts, but anonymous capital is judged purely on its utility. The most powerful aspect of financial invisibility is the leverage it provides. When David needed capital for his business, MC Holdings could provide it without triggering family dynamics or expectations. If I had offered to invest as his mother, the transaction would have been loaded with emotional baggage and family obligation. As an anonymous partner, the relationship remained purely professional. But maintaining this double life has costs that go beyond the administrative complexity of shell companies and legal structures. It means watching my son celebrate his self-made success while knowing that I enabled every major milestone. It means sitting at family dinners where they discuss financial stress and money worries while I could solve their problems with a single phone call. It means being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked by people who would treat me very differently if they knew the truth about my financial capability and business acumen. The pension story serves everyone's narrative needs. It explains my modest lifestyle without raising questions. It reinforces their assumptions about my limitations. It allows them to feel superior and protective while I quietly accumulate wealth and influence. But sometimes, like at David's wedding, the cost of invisibility becomes too high. When my own son dismisses me as irrelevant to his success, when he credits everyone except the person who made it all possible, the protection of anonymity becomes a prison of resentment. The portfolio statements locked in my safe represent more than just financial success. They represent the power to change the narrative whenever I choose to reveal the truth. The family photo collection, scattered across my coffee table, tells the story of my gradual disappearance from my son's life. The earliest photos show the 3 of us, Richard, David, and me, at holidays and birthdays, vacations, and school events. Richard's death marks a clear dividing line. After that, the photos show David's growing success and my shrinking presence in his celebrations. There's David's college graduation, where I'm visible in the background, while his girlfriend Jessica's parents flank him in the formal shots. His first business milestone celebration, where I'm at the edge of the group photo, while his business partner Jake stands prominently beside him. His housewarming party, where I'm barely visible in one corner shot while Jessica's entire family takes up the center of the frame. The pattern became more pronounced when Sarah entered the picture 3 years ago. Suddenly, family holidays shifted from my house to theirs. Birthday celebrations moved from casual dinners to elaborate restaurant affairs planned around Sarah's social calendar. The guest lists for David's achievements grew longer while my role grew smaller. Sarah's influence was subtle but persistent. She never directly excluded me, never said anything that could be construed as hostile. Instead, she simply reorganized David's world around different priorities. Family dinners became intimate gatherings for 6 people that somehow never included me. Weekend visits became couples activities with other young professionals. Holiday traditions that had anchored our family for 30 years were replaced with new customs that centered around Sarah's family and friends. The transformation was so gradual that by the time I recognized what was happening, I had already become peripheral to my own son's life. David didn't make a conscious decision to exclude me. He simply followed Sarah's lead as she reshaped his social landscape to match her vision of their future together. Sarah's family represented everything I wasn't in her mind. Her father, Robert, was a successful corporate executive who spoke the language of business strategy and market analysis. Her mother, Patricia, was a polished society woman who chaired charity boards and organized fundraising and galas. They lived in a world of country club memberships and expensive cars, European vacations, and private school connections. I was the secretary, the widow living on a pension, the woman who shopped at Target instead of Nordstrom, who drove a Honda instead of a BMW, who lived in a modest house instead of a prestigious neighborhood. In Sarah's carefully curated social world, I was an embarrassment to be managed rather than a mother-in-law to be embraced. The shift became painfully obvious during David's birthday celebration 2 years ago. For 25 years, I had hosted his birthday dinners at my house. They were casual, warm affairs where we'd make his favorite foods and tell stories about his childhood. That year, Sarah announced she was planning a surprise party at an upscale restaurant downtown. "It'll be so much more sophisticated, don't you think?" she said to David when she told me about the change. "I've invited all our friends from the business community. It's a great networking opportunity." I arrived at the restaurant to find myself seated at a table with people I'd never met, while David held court with his business associates and Sarah's social circle. The birthday toasts were about his professional achievements and future potential. No one mentioned the homemade cakes or the silly traditions that had marked his birthdays since childhood. When I tried to share a funny story about David's 10th birthday, Sarah smoothly redirected the conversation to his recent business award. When I suggested we sing Happy Birthday the way we always had, she explained that they'd already done a more elegant toast earlier. I went home that night feeling like a stranger at my own son's celebration. The pattern repeated itself in countless small ways over the following months. Christmas Eve dinner moved from my dining room to Sarah's parents' house because they have so much more space. Easter brunch became an adults-only affair at the country club because children and older relatives might find it overwhelming. Even casual visits required advanced scheduling through Sarah, who managed David's calendar with the efficiency of a personal assistant. The most painful realization came when I understood that David wasn't being manipulated. He was making choices. He preferred Sarah's polished social world to my comfortable familiarity. He enjoyed the status that came with her family's connections more than the warmth of our old traditions. He was actively choosing to distance himself from the life we had built together. What hurt most wasn't Sarah's influence, but David's acceptance of it. He could have insisted that I remain central to family celebrations. He could have maintained our traditions alongside new ones. He could have created space for both his old life and his new one. Instead, he allowed me to fade into the background of his success story. The woman who had raised him, supported him, sacrificed for him, became an inconvenient reminder of humble beginnings that no longer fit his elevated self-image. The irony was devastating. While Sarah and her family were positioning themselves as the sophisticated influences in David's life, I was the one funding his ability to impress them. While they celebrated his business acumen and self-made success, I was the anonymous partner making his achievements possible. Every family gathering where I felt diminished, every celebration where I was marginalized, every holiday where I was treated as an afterthought, all of it was enabled by my own financial support. I was paying for the privilege of being excluded from my son's life. The photos scattered on my coffee table document not just family history, but the systematic erasure of my importance to the person I loved most. Each image shows me becoming smaller, less central, more easily forgotten, while the beneficiaries of my invisible generosity claim the spotlight that should have included me. Looking at these photos after David's wedding, I finally understood that my anonymity hadn't protected our relationship, it had enabled its destruction. By hiding my true importance to his success, I had allowed others to minimize my value to his life. The board meeting minutes filed away in my attorney's office reveal the true extent of my influence over David's business empire Every major decision, every strategic pivot, every expansion plan, all of it filtered through MC Holdings' approval process, which meant it filtered through me. What David and his team experienced as remarkably responsive and insightful anonymous investors was actually me, sitting in my living room, analyzing their proposals with the same attention to detail I'd once applied to insurance policies and actuarial tables, while they assumed MC Holdings employed a team of business analysts and financial experts. The reality was far simpler and more personal. The monthly board meetings took place in Jonathan's law office, with David and his business partner Jake presenting their reports and requests to my attorney, who served as MC Holdings' representative. I attended these meetings not as Margaret Collins, David's mother, but as MC Holdings' principal decision-maker. My identity protected by attorney-client privilege and carefully structured corporate anonymity. Watching David present his business strategies to a room that included his own mother, without him knowing it, was both thrilling and heartbreaking. I saw his intelligence, his passion, his growing confidence as a leader. I also saw how completely he had bought into his own narrative of self-reliance and independent success. During one particularly crucial meeting in year 7, David presented his plan to expand into Canadian markets. The opportunity was substantial, but required significant infrastructure investment and regulatory compliance costs. His presentation was thorough, his market analysis solid, his risk assessment realistic. The initial investment will be substantial, he told the room, but our projections show break-even within 18 months and profitability by year 2. MC Holdings has been an incredible partner, and I hope you'll see the potential in this expansion. I listened to my son pitch his dreams to a room that included the person who had been making those dreams possible all along. When Jonathan asked pointed questions about cash flow and market penetration timelines, David's answers were confident and well-reasoned. When the presentation ended, I quietly approved the $400,000 funding request. David never knew that his most important investor was the woman he called twice a week to share his business victories and frustrations. He never suspected that the strategic insights that came through MC Holdings attorneys were often responses to concerns he'd expressed to me during our casual conversations. The proxy system I'd established allowed me to influence decisions without direct participation. When David's company needed to choose between 2 potential acquisitions, MC Holdings' recommendation came from my analysis of both companies' financial statements and market positions when they faced a hostile takeover attempt from a larger competitor. The defensive strategy that saved the company originated from research I'd commissioned using my network of business contacts. The most significant intervention came during David's darkest period in year 9. A software bug had caused massive data corruption for several major clients, triggering a cascade of lawsuits and contract cancellations. David's liability insurance covered some of the damages, but the company faced bankruptcy unless they could quickly develop and deploy a fix while also funding the legal defense. I watched my son present the crisis to MC Holdings with his voice shaking and his hands trembling as he flipped through damage reports and legal documents. This wasn't the confident entrepreneur I'd watched grow over the years. This was a scared young man facing the collapse of everything he'd built. I need to be completely honest, he said to the room. Without immediate bridge financing, we'll have to file for Chapter 11 within 60 days. I'm asking MC Holdings to essentially double down on an investment that might be worth nothing in 2 months. The room was silent as he finished his presentation. Jake looked defeated. David's attorney was already discussing bankruptcy procedures. The weight of their desperation filled the conference room like smoke. I asked Jonathan to call for a brief recess, during which I made the decision that would either save my son's company or cost me nearly $1 million. MC Holdings approved not just the bridge financing David requested, but also additional funding for an enhanced legal defense and a comprehensive customer retention program. when Jonathan announced the decision. David's relief was so profound that he actually began crying right there in the boardroom. "I don't know how to thank you," he said to the room, speaking to invisible benefactors, who included his own mother. "This partnership has saved my life's work." Within 6 months, the crisis was resolved. The software fix prevented further data loss, the legal settlements were manageable, and the customer retention program had actually strengthened relationships with several key clients. David's company emerged stronger and more resilient than before, but the most revealing moment came during a meeting in year 12, when David presented his vision for the company's future. He spoke about building a legacy, creating something that would outlast him, establishing himself as a significant figure in the technology industry. "When I started this company," he told the room, "I was just a guy with an idea and a lot of hope. Everything we've achieved has been through hard work, smart decisions, and the incredible support of partners like MC Holdings, who believed in our vision." He paused, looking around the conference room with the confidence of someone who had built something meaningful. "I'm proud to say that we've never taken the easy path. We've never relied on family money or personal connections. Everything we have, we earned." The irony was crushing. My son was celebrating his independence and self-reliance in a room where his mother sat anonymously. Having funded every major milestone, he was crediting to his own effort. He was taking pride in refusing family help while unknowingly accepting millions of dollars from his mother through a legal structure designed to protect his ego. The board meeting minutes document decisions and approvals, but they don't capture the emotional complexity of watching your child succeed through your support, while claiming credit for his independence. They don't show the pride I felt in his achievements or the hurt I experienced when he attributed those achievements to everyone except the person who made them possible. Those meetings taught me that anonymity isn't always protection. Sometimes it's a prison that prevents the people you love from recognizing your true value in their lives. Jonathan Hartwell's corner office overlooked downtown Columbus, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city David's business had helped shape through job creation and economic development. The legal dissolution papers spread across Jonathan's mahogany desk represented 15 years of careful legal architecture designed to protect my anonymity while enabling my son's success. "Margaret, I have to ask you to consider this decision very carefully," Jonathan said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he reviewed the partnership termination documents. "Dissolving MC Holdings' relationship with David's company will have immediate and significant consequences, both legal and financial." I sat across from him in the same chair where I'd made the decision to become David's anonymous partner 15 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was ending our business relationship in the same space where I'd begun it, with the same attorney who had helped create the legal structure that had funded my son's empire. "What exactly will happen when I trigger the dissolution clause?" I asked. Though I had read the partnership agreement so many times, I could recite the relevant sections from memory. Jonathan pulled out the original LLC operating agreement, its pages now yellowed with age but its language still precise and unforgiving. According to Section 12.3, MC Holdings can terminate the partnership with 30 days written notice. Upon termination, David's company has 90 days to either buy out MC Holdings' 40% stake at fair market value or liquidate assets to satisfy the partnership obligations. He paused, looking at me over his glasses with the expression of someone who had watched me make difficult decisions for over a decade. "Margaret, based on the most recent business valuation, MC Holdings' stake is worth approximately $3.2 million. David's company doesn't have that kind of liquidity, and I doubt they can secure financing for a buyout without knowing the identity of the partner they're purchasing from." The financial implications were exactly what I had anticipated. David's success was built on a foundation of borrowed capital and leverage growth. While the company generated healthy revenue, most of it was reinvested in expansion and development. The cash reserves wouldn't cover a multi-million-dollar partnership buyout, especially not within the 90-day timeline specified in our agreement. What happens if they can't arrange the buyout? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Forced liquidation, Jonathan replied grimly. The partnership agreement gives MC Holdings the right to demand immediate asset liquidation. To satisfy the debt obligation, David would essentially have to sell his company to pay back his anonymous partner. The legal structure I had insisted upon 15 years earlier was designed to protect my investment and ensure I could exit the partnership if necessary. I had never anticipated using these provisions as leverage in a family conflict, but David's dismissal of my importance had triggered a response I couldn't ignore. There is another option, Jonathan continued, leaning back in his chair. You could reveal your identity as MC Holdings principal and negotiate a family resolution. Once David knows you're his anonymous partner, the dynamics change completely. I considered this path for a moment. The revelation would certainly shock David and force him to recognize my true contribution to his success, but it would also feel like emotional blackmail, using my financial leverage to demand recognition and gratitude. That wasn't the relationship I wanted with my son. No, I said firmly. If I reveal myself now, it becomes about the money. He'll feel guilty and obligated, but he won't truly understand what he's lost. I want him to experience the consequences of dismissing people who matter to his success. Jonathan nodded, though his expression remained troubled. Margaret, you realize this will likely destroy his business, everything he's built, all those jobs he's created, the clients who depend on his services. It all disappears if MC Holdings pulls out. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders like a heavy coat. David's company employed 47 people, many of whom had families and mortgages and dreams tied to their jobs. His clients relied on his software for their daily operations. His success had created a ripple effect of prosperity that extended far beyond my son's personal achievements. But my anger burned brighter than my guilt. For 15 years, I had sacrificed and supported and enabled, only to be dismissed as irrelevant to the very success I had made possible. David needed to learn that his empire had foundations, and those foundations had names and feelings and expectations of basic respect. I want you to prepare the dissolution notice, I told Jonathan, but don't file it yet. I want to give David one opportunity to recognize what he's about to lose. Jonathan began drafting the legal documents while I explained my plan. I would host a family dinner, ostensibly to celebrate David and Sarah's marriage. During that dinner, I would give David a chance to acknowledge the people who had supported his journey to success. If he continued to credit only himself and his business associates, I would proceed with the partnership dissolution. This is a dangerous game, Margaret, Jonathan warned as he printed the preliminary dissolution papers. Once you start this process, there's no controlling how it ends. David will be desperate, confused, and angry. Sarah's family will likely be involved. The business community will ask questions about MC Holdings that we've worked very hard to avoid answering. He was right, of course. For 15 years, our carefully constructed anonymity had protected me from exactly these complications. Revealing myself as David's silent partner would expose me to scrutiny, criticism, and demands I had worked to avoid. The comfortable invisibility that had given me freedom would disappear permanently. I understand the risks, I replied, signing the authorization for him to proceed with document preparation. But I also understand that some things are more important than comfort and convenience. My son needs to learn that success has sources, and those sources deserve recognition and respect. As I left Jonathan's office that afternoon, The legal dissolution papers secured in my purse felt like a loaded weapon. I had the power to destroy everything David had built, to reduce his empire to rubble, to prove definitively that his success story was incomplete without acknowledging the woman who had funded it from the shadows. The question was whether I would have the courage to pull the trigger, and whether my son would give me a reason to holster the weapon instead. The drive home through the city David's business had helped transform reminded me that this wasn't just about family dynamics and wounded feelings. Real lives hung in the balance of my decision. Real consequences would flow from whatever action I chose to take. But sometimes, teaching someone the true cost of ingratitude requires risking everything they think they've built on their own. The complete financial records spread across my dining room table told a story that would fundamentally alter how anyone viewed David's rise to success. 15 years of bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, investment approvals, and legal documents created an undeniable paper trail connecting MC Holdings to every major milestone in my son's business empire. I spent 3 days organizing the evidence chronologically, creating a comprehensive timeline that showed not just the money I had provided, but the strategic decisions I had influenced and the crises I had helped resolve. Each document represented a moment when David's success hung in the balance, and my invisible support had tipped the scales in his favor. The earliest documents were the most poignant. David's original business plan, submitted to 12 banks and rejected by all of them, lay next to MC Holdings' initial investment approval. His desperate emails to potential investors, filled with passion and hope but lacking the financial backing to make his dreams credible, contrasted sharply with the wire transfer records showing $200 zero moving into his business account within days of our partnership agreement. Year two's documents showed the first major crisis, a software development delay that threatened to kill David's first major contract. His panicked correspondence with clients, explaining technical difficulties and requesting deadline extensions, was followed by MC Holdings' emergency funding approval for additional developers. The contract was completed on time, establishing David's reputation for reliability and launching his company's growth trajectory. The acquisition documents from Year 5 revealed the strategic brilliance of our partnership. David had identified 3 smaller companies whose technologies would give him competitive advantages, but lacked the capital for purchases. MC Holdings didn't just provide funding. I had researched each target company, analyzed their financial statements, and recommended negotiation strategies that saved David nearly $150 zero in acquisition costs. But the most damning evidence was in Year 8's crisis management file, when David's biggest competitor attempted to destroy his business through patent litigation and employee poaching. MC Holdings had funded a comprehensive defense strategy that included legal fees, retention bonuses, and a counter-litigation campaign. David had publicly credited his brilliant legal team and loyal employees for surviving the attack, never knowing that his mother had funded the war chest that made victory possible. I created separate folders for each category of support: initial capitalization, expansion funding, crisis management, strategic acquisitions, competitive defense, and infrastructure development. Each folder contained dozens of documents showing transfers, ranging from $50,000 for minor equipment purchases to $800,000 for major acquisitions. The research phase revealed details about David's business that he had never shared with me directly. His company's client list included some of the region's most successful businesses. His software had processed over $2 billion in transactions during the past 5 years. His employee retention rate was 94%, far above industry averages. His net profit margins had improved annually for 7 consecutive years. Every success metric, every achievement, every milestone that made David proud of his self-made status was built on the foundation of my anonymous support. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, but documenting my financial contributions was only part of the story. I also needed to prove my ongoing involvement in strategic decisions. The email records between Jonathan's office and David's company showed a pattern of MC Holdings requesting specific information, providing detailed feedback on business plans, and offering suggestions that David invariably implemented when David had wanted to expand into Canadian markets. MC Holdings had requested additional demographic analysis and regulatory compliance research. David's team had spent 2 weeks preparing reports that addressed exactly the concerns I had raised through my attorney when they presented their revised expansion plan. It incorporated every suggestion MC Holdings had provided when David considered relocating his headquarters to a more prestigious office building. MC Holdings had requested a cost-benefit analysis that included productivity impacts and employee commuting considerations. David's decision to remain in his current location while upgrading the existing facilities reflected the practical concerns I had raised about unnecessary overhead expenses. The pattern was consistent across 15 years of business decisions. MC Holdings wasn't just a passive investor, we were an active strategic partner whose input shaped every aspect of David's company's development. The evidence showed that David's business acumen was actually a collaborative effort between him and his anonymous mother. I also documented the personal benefits David had received through our partnership structure. The licensing arrangement that generated passive income for his personal expenses, the strategic timing of distributions that allowed him to purchase his house and fund his lifestyle with Sarah, the debt restructuring that had improved his personal credit rating and qualified him for favorable loan terms, even David's ability to maintain majority ownership while funding rapid expansion was a direct result of MC Holdings' patient capital approach. Any other investor would have demanded increasing equity stakes as investment levels grew. Only a mother would provide millions in funding while allowing her son to maintain control and claim credit for the success. The most sobering realization came when I calculated the total impact of my support. Without MC Holdings, David's company would never have survived its first year. Without my crisis management funding, it would have failed during any of 3 separate existential threats. Without my acquisition financing, it would have remained a small regional business instead of becoming an industry leader. Every employee David had hired, every client he had served, every innovation his company had developed, none of it would have existed without my invisible foundation. His business empire wasn't just funded by my money. It was shaped by my strategic guidance and sustained by my crisis management. The evidence filled for bankers' boxes and painted a picture that would shock anyone who knew David's story. The confident entrepreneur who spoke at business conferences about self-reliance and independent thinking was actually the front man for a mother-son partnership that he didn't even know existed. But the most important document in the entire collection was the partnership dissolution notice sitting in my attorney's office, waiting for my final signature. All the evidence in the world couldn't change the fundamental question. Did David deserve to keep the empire I had helped him build, even if he refused to acknowledge the source of his success? The answer to that question would determine whether I was gathering evidence for a revelation or a destruction. The dinner invitation I sent to David and Sarah was carefully crafted to seem like a simple celebration of their marriage, but every detail was strategically planned to create the perfect opportunity for revelation or reckoning. One chose a Sunday evening, knowing that David was most relaxed after weekends and most likely to speak candidly about his achievements and future plans. Dearest David and Sarah, I wrote in my careful handwriting on cream-colored stationery, I would love to host a small dinner party to properly celebrate your marriage and David's continued business success. Please join me this Sunday at 6 o'clock for an evening of family celebration. I'm also inviting a few close friends who have watched David grow from a young dreamer into the successful entrepreneur he is today. The guest list was my masterpiece of psychological strategy. I invited my neighbor Ellen, who had known David since childhood and remembered his struggles in college. I invited my former colleague Patricia from the insurance company, who had watched me navigate widowhood and had often commented on my pride in David's achievements. I invited Jonathan, my attorney, ostensibly as a family friend, but actually as a witness to whatever unfolded. Most importantly, I invited Robert and Patricia, Sarah's parents, who had become such central figures in David's new social world. Their presence would ensure that David felt compelled to maintain his successful, self-made image while surrounded by people who had known him before that image was complete. The menu planning became an exercise in emotional archaeology. I prepared all of David's childhood favorites: the pot roast with carrots and potatoes. That had been his birthday dinner request every year until he turned 18. The chocolate cake with peanut butter frosting that he had begged me to make for school celebrations. The green bean casserole that he always requested for holidays. Each dish carried memories of times when I was central to his happiness, when my efforts to please him were acknowledged and appreciated. If this dinner was going to be my last attempt to connect with my son before dissolving our business partnership, I wanted it to remind him of the woman who had loved and supported him long before anyone else knew his name. I spent Saturday afternoon preparing the house, polishing silver that hadn't been used since Richard's funeral, arranging flowers from my garden, setting the dining room table with china that held decades of family celebrations. The preparation felt both like hosting a party and conducting a funeral, celebrating the relationship I hoped to restore while mourning the one I was prepared to end. The emotional preparation was more complex than the physical arrangements. I rehearsed conversations in my head, imagining different ways David might respond to subtle prompts about his business success. Would he finally acknowledge the people who had supported him? Would he recognize that his achievements weren't entirely self-generated? Would he give me an opening to reveal my true role in his empire? I also prepared for the possibility that he would continue his pattern of self-aggrandizement and credit claiming. If David spent the evening talking about his self-made success while sitting at the table where I had signed the checks that made that success possible, I would know that our business relationship needed to end. The legal dissolution papers waited in my bedroom safe, signed and ready for delivery to Jonathan after dinner. If David failed my final test of recognition and gratitude, those papers would be filed Monday morning, beginning the 90-day countdown to the end of his business empire. Sunday morning, I called Jonathan to confirm his attendance and review our contingency plans. "Are you certain you want to proceed this way?" he asked for the fourth time that week. "Once this evening is over, there's no taking back whatever happens, I'm certain," I replied, though my hand shook as I spoke. 15 years of anonymous support deserves better than being dismissed as irrelevant. If David can't recognize the value of the people who matter to his success, then maybe he doesn't deserve that success. By Sunday afternoon, my anxiety had transformed into cold determination. I arranged the evidence folders in my bedroom, easily accessible if needed, but hidden from casual observation. I reviewed the key points I wanted to make if the evening progressed to revelation. I practiced the calm, measured tone I would use to explain 15 years of secret partnership and financial support. Most importantly, I mentally rehearsed the moment when I would either embrace my son in reconciliation or hand him the dissolution papers that would destroy everything he thought he had built on his own. The first, Sarah squeezed David's hand. "It's been such a blessing to have patient capital that doesn't interfere with David's vision. So many entrepreneurs get trapped by investors who want to micromanage every decision." Patricia, my former colleague, looked confused. "MC Holdings? I don't think I've heard of them. Are they a local investment firm?" "Actually, nobody really knows much about them," David replied with a slight shrug. "They maintain complete anonymity. All communication goes through lawyers. For all I know, it could be some tech billionaire who likes supporting startups, Or maybe a family foundation. The mystery has always been part of their appeal. The conversation was proceeding exactly as I had anticipated. David was proudly describing his relationship with MC Holdings, while sitting 6 feet away from the principal owner and decision-maker. He was crediting anonymous investors for believing in him, while dismissing the emotional support of the woman who had risked millions to fund his dreams. "How fascinating," Ellen said, glancing meaningfully in my direction. "So this MC Holdings has been your primary supporter all these years?" "Absolutely. I mean, banks wouldn't touch me in the early days. Family money wasn't an option, not that Mom had that kind of capital anyway." David laughed affectionately. "But MC Holdings saw something in the business plan that traditional lenders missed. They've been incredible partners." The phrase "family money wasn't an option" hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. My son had just publicly dismissed the possibility that his family could have supported his business ambitions, while unknowingly describing the exact support his family had provided through careful legal structures. "That must have been challenging," Robert said. "Building a business without family financial support. Not everyone has that kind of independence." "It was definitely harder," David agreed. "But I'm proud that everything we've built came from our own efforts and smart partnerships with people who believed in the business model rather than just helping out a relative." Sarah nodded approvingly. "David's always been so principled about that. Even when we were planning the wedding and money was tight, he refused to ask his mother for help. He said he wanted to build his own life without depending on family resources." The revelation was stunning in its casual cruelty. While I had been anonymously funding David's business expansion, he had been simultaneously maintaining a principled stance against accepting family financial support. While MC Holdings had been providing millions in capital, David had been proudly refusing to ask his mother for wedding assistance. I excused myself to check on dinner, needing a moment to process the emotional impact of what I had just learned. In the kitchen, surrounded by the aromas of David's favorite childhood foods, I made the decision that would change everything. When I returned to the living room, I carried a small silver tray containing business cards that would end 15 years of anonymity and alter my son's understanding of his own success story forever. "Before we sit down to dinner," I announced with a calm smile that betrayed none of the turmoil in my chest, "I have something rather interesting to share with everyone." The detailed investment spreadsheet I placed on the coffee table documented every dollar of the $2.3 million I had transferred to David's business over 15 years. Each line item represented a moment when my son's empire had needed financial lifeline, and each amount showed the magnitude of support he had unknowingly received from the woman he had just described as lacking that kind of capital. "David," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake I was about to trigger, "I'd like you to look at this financial summary and tell me if the numbers seem familiar." David leaned forward, his wine glass forgotten, as he scanned the spreadsheet. The first entry showed $200,000 transferred on September 15th, 15 years ago, exactly 3 days after he had sat in my kitchen explaining his need for startup capital. His eyes moved down the page, taking in transfer after transfer, each one corresponding to a major business milestone or crisis resolution. "I don't understand," David said slowly, his face growing pale as he processed the implications. "This shows MC Holdings providing how much money?" $2.3 million, I replied calmly, "plus strategic guidance, crisis management, and partnership restructuring that enable you to maintain majority ownership while funding rapid expansion." Sarah grabbed David's arm, her perfect composure cracking as she stared at the numbers. "David, how is this possible? You said MC Holdings was completely anonymous. How does your mother have their financial records?" Jonathan cleared his throat and spoke for the first time since the revelation began. "Because Margaret Collins is MC Holdings. She's been David's anonymous partner for 15 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert and Patricia exchanged shocked glances. Ellen covered her mouth with her hand. Sarah's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as she realized the implications for everything she thought she knew about her husband's success. David's reaction was the most profound. The confident entrepreneur who had been holding court about his self-made success story crumbled into a confused and frightened young man, confronting the destruction of his entire self-image. "That's impossible," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mom, you live on Dad's pension. You drive a Honda. You shop at Target. You don't have millions of dollars to invest in businesses." I retrieved the second folder from the sideboard and spread out documents that told the real story of my financial situation. Bank statements showing accounts worth millions, investment portfolios that had generated substantial returns over the past decade, real estate holdings that produced monthly rental income exceeding David's corporate salary. The pension covers my groceries and utilities, I explained matter-of-factly. Everything else comes from investments I've made since your father died. I've been quite successful, actually. Patricia, my former colleague, laughed with genuine delight. "Margaret, you magnificent woman. I always wondered how you manage those expensive trips to Europe on a secretary's pension. You've been building a financial empire while letting everyone think you were barely getting by." But David wasn't sharing in the admiration for my financial acumen. His face had shifted from confusion to anger as he processed what my revelation meant for his carefully constructed identity. "You've been lying to me," he said, his voice rising. "For 15 years, you've been pretending to be my business partner while acting like you couldn't afford to help with anything. Do you have any idea how many times I worried about money? How many nights I stayed awake wondering if the business would survive? Every single crisis you worried about was resolved with my money," I replied quietly. "Every expansion you celebrated was funded by my investments. Every acquisition that gave you competitive advantages was purchased with my capital. You never had to worry about money because I was ensuring you never ran out of it." Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the window as she struggled to process the revelation. "This changes everything. David, don't you see? Your entire success story is based on family money. All those speeches about self-reliance and independent achievement were still true," I interrupted firmly. "David built a successful business with excellent products and smart management. I provided capital and strategic guidance, but he provided vision, leadership, and execution. Our partnership worked because we each contributed what the other needed." Robert, who had been silent during the initial revelation, finally spoke with the measured tone of someone accustomed to analyzing complex business situations. "Margaret, this is an impressive financial strategy, but I have to ask, why the secrecy? Why not structure this as a transparent family investment?" The question went to the heart of everything I had struggled with over the past 15 years. Why had I chosen anonymity over recognition? Why had I enabled David's self-made narrative instead of claiming credit for my role in his success? Because I wanted David to succeed on his own merits, I explained, looking directly at my son. If he had known I was his investor, every decision would have been influenced by family dynamics. Every disagreement would have carried emotional baggage. Every business setback would have felt like a personal failure, affecting his mother's money. David was studying the financial records with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that redefined his entire life. The Canadian expansion, the patent litigation defense, the acquisition strategy that put us ahead of the competition. "That was all you. That was all us," I corrected. "You identified the opportunities and managed the execution. I provided the resources and strategic input. You built something remarkable, David. You just didn't build it alone." The weight of my revelation was settling over the room like fog, obscuring the comfortable assumptions everyone had made about family roles and financial capabilities. David's success story hadn't disappeared, but it had become infinitely more complex and collaborative than anyone had understood. But the most important question remained unasked and unanswered. Now that David knew the truth about his anonymous partner, what would he do with that knowledge? The business loan applications spread across my coffee table told a story that David couldn't deny. No matter how much his pride demanded, the room fell silent as my words hit their target. Sarah's composure cracked slightly, revealing the calculating social climber beneath the polished exterior. David looked stricken as he realized that his anger at me was being redirected toward examination of his own behavior and choices. "Mom," David said finally, his voice smaller and more uncertain than it had been all evening. "What do you want from me? What am I supposed to do with this information?" The question I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. What did I want? Recognition, gratitude, an apology for years of being dismissed and overlooked, a return to the close relationship we had shared before Sarah's influence reshaped his priorities. "I want you to understand that success has sources," I replied simply. "I want you to recognize that the people who support your dreams deserve better than being dismissed as irrelevant. And I want you to decide whether our partnership continues or ends. Now that you know the truth about who's been funding your empire." The withdrawal notice I placed on the coffee table next to the financial records represented the end of 15 years of anonymous partnership and the beginning of a 90-day countdown that would either destroy David's business empire or force him to confront the true cost of dismissing the people who mattered to his success. "What is this?" David asked, though the legal letterhead and formal language made the document's purpose unmistakably clear. "Notice of partnership dissolution," I replied calmly. "MC Holdings is formally withdrawing from our business relationship. According to the operating agreement you signed 15 years ago, you have 90 days to buy out our 40% stake at fair market value or liquidate assets to satisfy the partnership obligations." The color drained from David's face as he processed the implications. Sarah grabbed the document and read it with the speed of someone accustomed to analyzing legal contracts, her expression growing more alarmed with each paragraph. "Margaret, this is approximately $3.2 million, Robert said after reviewing the valuation summary attached to the withdrawal notice. "Does David's company have that kind of liquidity?" Jonathan answered with the precision of someone who had structured the original partnership to give me maximum leverage. "Based on the most recent financial statements, the company has approximately $400, zero in cash reserves and credit facilities that might provide another $600,000. Securing additional financing for a buyout would require full disclosure of MC Holdings' identity and the reasons for partnership dissolution." The impossible mathematics of the situation settled over David like a suffocating blanket. His successful business, built on steady growth and smart reinvestment, had never maintained the kind of cash reserves necessary to buy out a major partner. Every dollar of profit had been channeled back into expansion, development, and market positioning. "You're destroying my company," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. 15 years of work, 47 employees, thousands of clients who depend on our software. You're willing to destroy all of that because I hurt your feelings at my wedding? The accusation was designed to make me seem petty and vindictive, but it missed the fundamental issue that had driven me to this moment. This wasn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride. It was about recognition and respect for the sources of success. "I'm not destroying your company," I corrected. "I'm ending a partnership with someone who doesn't value what I've contributed. You have 90 days to find alternative financing, bring in new investors, or restructure the business. The company can survive without MC Holdings if you're truly the brilliant entrepreneur you claim to be." Sarah's financial calculations were proceeding in parallel with her social damage assessment. "David, even if we could arrange financing for the buyout, the story would become public. Everyone would know that your business was built on family money, the networking contacts, the industry reputation, the speaking engagements. All of that changes when people understand the real source of your capital. The social implications were indeed devastating for someone who had built a personal brand around self-reliance and independent achievement. David's credibility as a self-made entrepreneur would evaporate the moment the business community learned that his anonymous investor was his mother. Every speech he had given, every interview he had granted, every conference presentation he had delivered would be reframed as the story of a man who had unknowingly accepted millions in family money while claiming to be entirely self-sufficient. There has to be another solution, David said desperately, looking around the room for support that wasn't forthcoming. Mom, we can work this out. I'll acknowledge your contribution. I'll give you credit for supporting the business. I'll change how I talk about the company's history. But his offer came too late and addressed too little. After 15 years of invisibility and 3 years of increasing marginalization, promises of future recognition felt hollow and inadequate. David, I said gently, do you remember what you said at your wedding reception? You thanked everyone who mattered, everyone who helped build your dream, everyone who believed in you from the beginning. You looked directly at me and saw someone who didn't matter. Ellen nodded vigorously. Your mother has spent 15 years sacrificing for your success, and you dismissed her as irrelevant in front of 200 people. You can't fix that kind of hurt with promises and apologies. Patricia, my former colleague, added her own perspective with the sharp insight of someone who had watched me navigate financial independence after widowhood. Margaret has been building her own empire while quietly funding yours. She doesn't need your business to succeed, but your business apparently can't succeed without her. The truth of that statement hung in the air like smoke. While David had been building his reputation as a self-made entrepreneur, I had been building genuine financial independence through diversified investments and strategic business relationships. MC Holdings was just one component of a much larger portfolio that would continue generating wealth regardless of what happened to David's company. What about our employees? David asked, playing his final card in a desperate attempt to change my mind. Jenny in accounting has 3 kids. Mike in development just bought his first house. Tom in sales is getting married next month. Are you really willing to destroy their lives because of a family disagreement? The emotional manipulation was transparent but effective. 47 people had built their careers and financial security around David's company. Their livelihoods depended on the business that I was now threatening to collapse through partnership withdrawal. But David's attempt to make me responsible for their fate revealed the same blindness that had created this crisis. Those employees hadn't built their security around David's independent achievement. They had built it around a business funded and sustained by my anonymous investment. Their jobs existed because I had provided the capital that enabled their hiring, their growth, their success. David, I said quietly, those employees work for a company that I helped build and fund. Their security has always depended on my investment, whether they knew it or not. If you want to protect their jobs, find a way to buy out my partnership, stake or convince me that you finally understand the value of what I've contributed. Jonathan checked his watch and spoke with the formal tone of someone transitioning from family friend to legal advisor. The withdrawal notice has been served. The 90-day clock begins tomorrow morning. David, I'd recommend consulting with your own attorney about financing options and business restructuring possibilities. As the evening's guests began to leave, carrying with them the explosive knowledge of what they had witnessed, David sat alone at my coffee table, staring at the documents that represented both the foundation of his success and the instrument of its potential destruction. The partnership that had enabled his empire was ending, and the countdown to its consequences had begun. The business creditor notices began arriving at David's office within 3 weeks of my withdrawal announcement. As word of MC Holdings' departure spread through the industry's financial networks, faster than a fire through dry timber. Every major supplier, equipment leasing company, and service provider wanted reassurance that their invoices would continue to be paid. Now that David's primary financial backing was disappearing, I learned about the mounting pressure through Jonathan, who maintained communication with David's attorney as the 90-day deadline approached. The picture that emerged was one of a successful business suddenly facing the reality of its financial foundations. David's trying to secure a bank loan for the buyout, Jonathan reported during our weekly update meeting. But the banks are asking the same questions that MC Holdings should have been asking all along about cash flow sustainability, debt-to-equity ratios, and long-term viability. Without patient capital backing, the analysis was damning. David's company had grown accustomed to MC Holdings' flexible financing, which had provided capital when needed without demanding immediate returns or imposing restrictive covenants. Traditional lenders operated under entirely different expectations, requiring quarterly debt service payments, maintaining strict cash reserve requirements, and imposing operational restrictions that would fundamentally change how the business functioned. What about alternative investors? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. That's where things get complicated. Jonathan replied with a slight smile. Any sophisticated investor wants to understand why MC Holdings is withdrawing from what appears to be a profitable partnership. David can't answer that question without revealing that his anonymous partner was his mother, and he walked away from a family relationship that had funded his entire business empire. The social and professional consequences were spreading beyond the immediate financial crisis. David's reputation in the business community was built on his self-made success story, and maintaining that narrative required concealing the real reason for MC Holdings' departure. But concealing family dynamics made it impossible to provide potential investors with an honest assessment of the partnership dissolution. Sarah's response to the crisis revealed the transactional nature of her devotion to David's success, according to mutual friends who reported back to Ellen. Sarah had begun making discreet inquiries about the legal implications of business failure for personal assets. She was protecting herself while David scrambled to save the company that had defined his identity and provided their lifestyle. The most heartbreaking consequence was the impact on David's employees. I had spent 15 years watching him hire talented people, create meaningful jobs, and build a workplace culture that fostered innovation and loyalty. Those 47 employees had trusted David's leadership and invested their careers in his vision, never knowing that their security depended on an anonymous family partnership that could disappear at any moment. Tom in sales, who was planning his wedding for next month, had to explain to his fiancée that his job might not survive the summer. Jenny in accounting, supporting 3 children as a single mother, was updating her resume while trying to maintain optimism about the company's future. Mike in development, who had just purchased his first house, was quietly exploring other employment opportunities while publicly supporting David's leadership. The human cost of the crisis weighed on me more heavily than I had anticipated. These were good people who had done nothing wrong, who had contributed to building something valuable, who deserved better than being caught in the crossfire of a family conflict. But they were also living proof of what David had accomplished. With my support, evidence of the positive impact that our partnership had created in the world. David's attempts to resolve the crisis grew increasingly desperate as the deadline approached. He reached out to former clients, hoping to accelerate payment schedules that might generate enough cash for a partial buyout. He contacted suppliers, requesting extended payment terms that would free up working capital. He even approached competitors, exploring acquisition offers that would provide the liquidity needed to satisfy MC Holdings' withdrawal demands. But every potential solution led back to the same fundamental problem. David's business was profitable and growing, but it wasn't structured to operate without the patient capital and strategic support that MC Holdings had provided. 15 years of partnership had created dependencies that couldn't be quickly restructured or easily replaced. The most telling moment came when David finally called me directly, abandoning the legal intermediaries who had managed our communication for 15 years. His voice on the phone was shaken and desperate, stripped of the confidence that had characterized our relationship since his business began succeeding. "Mom, we need to talk," he said simply. "Not through lawyers, not with other people present, just you and me. The way we used to talk before all of this got so complicated." I agreed to meet him at the small coffee shop where we had sometimes shared breakfast. During his college years, back when our relationship was simple and uncomplicated by success, money, and the expectations that had grown up around both, sitting across from my son in that familiar setting, I saw not the confident entrepreneur who had dismissed me at his wedding, but the anxious young man who had once asked for my help in believing in his dreams. The crisis had stripped away the polished exterior that success had given him, revealing the person I had raised and loved long before he became someone that others admired and envied. "I've been thinking about what you said that night at dinner," David began, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup like a lifeline. "About success having sources, about recognizing the people who matter. I think I understand now what you were trying to tell me, but understanding and acceptance weren't the same thing, and I wasn't sure that either of us was ready for the conversation that would determine whether our relationship, both personal and professional, could survive the revelations and consequences of the past month." The handwritten apology letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier with the kind of urgency usually reserved for legal documents and medical emergencies. David's careful handwriting filled 4 pages of cream-colored stationery, each word chosen with the precision of someone who understood that this might be his last opportunity to repair 15 years of accumulated misunderstanding and hurt. "Dear Mom," the letter began, "I've been trying to find the right words to express how profoundly I've misunderstood our relationship and how deeply I regret the pain I've caused through my blindness and ingratitude. Sitting in my office yesterday, looking at the employment contracts for 47 people whose jobs depend on decisions I make in the next 60 days, I finally understand the weight of responsibility you've carried for 15 years while I took credit for achievements that were only possible because of your sacrifice and support." I read the letter twice before setting it aside and making coffee, needing time to process David's words and evaluate whether they represented genuine understanding or strategic damage control motivated by his business crisis. The letter continued, with specific acknowledgments that showed David had spent considerable time analyzing our partnership and his role in its deterioration. He apologized for the wedding speech that had dismissed my importance, for the years of gradually excluding me from family celebrations, for allowing Sarah's social priorities to reshape his relationship with the woman who had raised and supported him. I realize now that my pride in being self-made was not just inaccurate. It was insulting to the person who made my success possible, he wrote. "Every time I claimed independence, I was diminishing your contribution. Every time I credited anonymous investors while dismissing family support, I was lying about the source of my achievements. Every time I accepted praise for my business acumen while treating you as someone who didn't understand my world, I was betraying the partnership that created that world." But the most significant portion of the letter addressed the future rather than the past. David outlined a proposal for restructuring our relationship that would acknowledge my role while preserving his business and protecting his employees. He suggested public recognition of MC Holdings' identity, formal business partnership documentation that would give me appropriate credit, and a renewed personal relationship based on honesty, rather than the polite distance that had characterized our interactions for the past 3 years. "I know that 15 years of taking you for granted can't be erased by a letter and promises. David concluded, but I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that I finally understand what I almost lost through my selfishness and blindness. Our partnership created something meaningful, not just a successful business, but jobs for good people, services that help other businesses succeed, and a legacy that we built together even when I was too proud to acknowledge your contribution. The letter was followed by a series of phone calls from family members and friends who had learned about our conflict and felt compelled to offer their perspectives on family forgiveness and business relationships. Sarah's mother, Patricia, called to suggest that family disputes shouldn't be allowed to destroy successful businesses. Ellen called to express her admiration for my stand while encouraging reconciliation. Even Robert, Sarah's father, called to acknowledge that David's treatment of me had been inappropriate and to suggest that his business experience might help mediate a resolution. But the most significant call came from Sarah herself, speaking without David's knowledge from their house while he was at the office, trying to manage the continuing crisis. Mrs. Collins, Sarah began, her voice lacking the polish and confidence that usually characterized our interactions. I need to apologize for my role in creating the distance between you and David. I've been thinking about the past 3 years, and I realize that I encouraged David to minimize your importance in his life because I was threatened by your relationship with him. The admission was surprising in its honesty and uncomfortable in its implications. Sarah was acknowledging that she had deliberately worked to diminish my role in David's life, not through malice, but through insecurity about her own position in his affections and priorities. I wanted to be the most important woman in his life. Sarah continued, and I saw your relationship with him as competition rather than recognizing that different relationships serve different purposes. I turned family dinners into social obligations, family traditions into inconvenient reminders of a past that didn't include me, and family loyalty into something that seemed limiting rather than supportive. Sarah's apology was more thorough and specific than David's letter, perhaps because she understood that her influence had been a catalyst for the deterioration of our relationship. She acknowledged pushing David toward viewing success as something that required distance from his humble beginnings, including the family relationships that had sustained him before he achieved prosperity. The night of our wedding, Sarah said, when David gave that speech about everyone who mattered to his success, I was proud that he didn't mention family, because I thought it showed he had evolved beyond needing emotional support from his past. Now I understand that dismissing the people who loved him before he was successful wasn't evolution. It was ingratitude and stupidity. But Sarah's call revealed something even more significant than her role in our conflict. She had spent the past month researching my financial situation and business acumen, trying to understand how the woman she had dismissed as a pension-dependent widow had actually built a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio while anonymously funding her husband's empire. I've been learning about your business investments, Sarah said with genuine admiration in her voice. David's company is just one component of a much larger portfolio, isn't it? You've been building wealth and supporting other businesses while everyone assumed you were financially dependent and business naive. The recognition was gratifying, but also concerning. Sarah's newfound respect for my financial capabilities felt transactional, based on discovering my usefulness rather than recognizing my inherent value as David's mother and longtime supporter. Double quotes Mrs. Collins. Sarah concluded, I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness, but I'm hoping you'll consider giving David another chance to prove he understands what he almost lost, not just as a business partner, but as the mother who believed in him when no one else would. The reconciliation attempts were sincere and comprehensive, addressing both the personal hurts and business realities that had created our crisis. But they also raised the fundamental question that had driven me to dissolution in the first place. Could David truly change his perspective on our relationship? Or were these apologies motivated primarily by his desperate need to save his business? With 30 days remaining until the partnership dissolution deadline, I had to decide whether David's newfound understanding was genuine transformation or crisis-driven performance. The new investment portfolio spread across my home office desk represented a fundamental shift in how I chose to deploy my financial resources and emotional energy. Instead of maintaining anonymous partnerships that protected other people's egos while hiding my contributions, I was building visible relationships with entrepreneurs who welcomed experienced investors and valued collaborative success. 3 weeks after David's deadline passed without resolution, I had redirected MC Holdings Capital toward supporting 5 different businesses led by founders who understood that success requires acknowledgement of its sources. The diversity of these investments reflected both sound financial strategy and personal satisfaction in working with people who appreciated partnership rather than taking it for granted. The first investment went to Maria Santos, a brilliant software engineer who had developed revolutionary inventory management systems for restaurants and retail businesses. At 32, Maria reminded me of David during his early years, passionate, intelligent, and frustrated by the gap between her vision and her resources. The difference was that Maria welcomed my strategic input, credited my contributions in her business presentations, and treated our partnership as collaborative achievement rather than anonymous charity. "Margaret, I can't believe the difference your involvement has made," Maria said during our monthly strategy meeting. "Not just the capital, but your insights about market positioning and customer development. I want everyone to know that MC Holdings isn't just providing money, you're providing wisdom that's making this company stronger." The second investment supported Jennifer Kim, a former corporate attorney who had started a legal services firm specializing in small business contracts and intellectual property protection. Jennifer's client base included many technology startups that needed sophisticated legal support but couldn't afford large firm rates. Her business model combined social mission with financial sustainability, exactly the kind of venture that excited my interest and aligned with my values. The third investment was perhaps the most personally meaningful funding for Marcus Williams, a young Black entrepreneur who had developed educational software to help high school students prepare for college entrance exams. Marcus had faced rejection from traditional lenders who questioned both his market analysis and his ability to scale the business beyond local markets. His presentation to MC Holdings was thorough, passionate, and realistic about both opportunities and challenges. "Mrs. Collins," Marcus said after I approved his funding request, "you're not just investing in my business, you're investing in kids who need someone to believe in their potential. That means everything to me, and I'll never let you forget how much your support matters to this mission." The fourth and fifth investments diversified my portfolio into retail and manufacturing, supporting a sustainable clothing company led by 2 young women who had developed innovative production methods, and a small-scale furniture manufacturer who specialized in custom pieces for commercial clients. Each of these partnerships operated under complete transparency about MC Holdings' identity and my role as principal investor. My business cards listed my name, contact information, and investment focus. My office meetings were conducted as Margaret Collins, experienced investor and strategic advisor, rather than as an anonymous entity communicating through legal intermediaries. The transformation was professionally rewarding and personally liberating. Instead of hiding my business acumen behind secretive structures, I was building a reputation as a savvy investor who provided both capital and strategic guidance to growing companies. Industry publications began featuring articles about my investment philosophy and success stories. Business conferences invited me to speak about patient capital and collaborative partnerships. But the most satisfying aspect of my new investment approach was the relationships I was building with entrepreneurs who valued partnership and understood that success stories should include recognition of the people who make them possible. Maria credited MC Holdings in her presentations to potential clients. Jennifer referred other entrepreneurs to me for potential investment consideration. Marcus invited me to graduation ceremonies for students whose college preparation had been supported by our educational software. The contrast with my experience as David's anonymous partner was stark and painful. While these new entrepreneurs celebrated our partnerships and acknowledged my contributions to their success, my own son had spent 15 years claiming credit for achievements that were only possible because of my invisible support. The phone call from David came on a Thursday evening, 2 months after his partnership dissolution deadline had passed. His voice was subdued, but not desperate, suggesting that he had found some way to manage the crisis I had created by withdrawing my support. "Mom," he said simply, "I wanted you to know that we've restructured the business successfully. We brought in 3 new investors who understand the company's potential and are providing patient capital. Similar to what MC Holdings offered, the employees are secure, the clients are confident, and the business is growing again." I felt simultaneously relieved and disappointed by his news. Relief that David had managed to save his company and protect his employees without my intervention. Disappointment that he had found a way to continue his success story without acknowledging the foundational role I had played in creating it. "I'm glad you were able to work things out," I replied, meaning it despite my complex emotions about his success. "The thing is," David continued, "the new investors wanted to understand why MC Holdings had withdrawn from such a successful partnership. I had to tell them the truth about our relationship and about how badly I had handled recognizing your contributions to the company." The revelation was unexpected. David had finally been forced to acknowledge publicly that his anonymous partner was his mother, that his success story was built on family support, and that his treatment of that relationship had been inadequate and hurtful. "How did they respond?" I asked, genuinely curious about how sophisticated investors would evaluate the family dynamics that had driven my withdrawal. "They said it was the stupidest business mistake they'd ever heard of," David replied with a rueful laugh, driving away a patient capital partner who had funded 15 years of growth. Because I was too proud to acknowledge her contributions, they made it clear that one condition of their investment was that I repair my relationship with the person who had made their opportunity possible. The new investors, it seemed, understood something that David had taken 15 years to learn. Successful businesses depend on relationships, and damaging those relationships has consequences that extend far beyond hurt feelings. But the most important revelation came at the end of our conversation, when David asked if there might be an opportunity for us to work together again in the future. "Not as anonymous partners," he said carefully, "but as family members who respect each other's contributions and can build something meaningful together based on honesty instead of secrecy." The question hung between us like a bridge that neither of us was quite ready to cross, but both of us could see in the distance. The thank you card from Maria Santos sits framed on my office desk, next to photos of graduation ceremonies, ribbon cuttings, and business conferences where I've been recognized as an investor who makes a difference in entrepreneurs' lives. The card's simple message captures everything I had hoped to achieve when I chose to end my anonymous partnership with David and build visible relationships with people who valued collaborative success. "Dear Margaret," Maria wrote in her careful handwriting, "today marks the 2nd anniversary of MC Holdings' investment in my company. We've grown from 3 employees to 18, from serving local restaurants to providing software for chains across 5 states. But more importantly, we've built something together that proves business success can be both profitable and meaningful. Thank you for believing in my vision and for insisting that our partnership be based on mutual respect and shared credit. You've taught me that the best investors don't just provide capital, they provide wisdom, encouragement, and the kind of patient support that transforms dreams into lasting achievements. The transformation in my professional life over the past 3 years has exceeded my most optimistic expectations. MC Holdings now manages a portfolio of 12 businesses, each one led by entrepreneurs who understand that success requires acknowledging its sources and honoring the relationships that make achievement possible. My investment philosophy has attracted attention from other family offices and impact investors who share my commitment to patient capital and collaborative partnerships. But the most significant transformation has been in my relationship with David, which has evolved from anonymous dependency to honest partnership based on mutual respect and clear acknowledgement of each other's contributions. The process hasn't been easy or quick, requiring both of us to abandon comfortable roles and learn new ways of relating to each other. As adults who had built something meaningful together, the reconciliation began 6 months after David's crisis resolution, when he invited me to speak at a business conference about family investment and patient capital. Instead of hiding our relationship or minimizing my role in his success, David introduced me as the investor who taught me that success has sources, and those sources deserve recognition and respect. His presentation that day told the complete story of his business development, including the anonymous partnership that had funded his growth and the family conflict that had nearly destroyed everything we had built together. He acknowledged his mistakes in taking credit for achievements that were only possible because of my support, and he credited my strategic guidance with many of the decisions that had distinguished his company from competitors. My mother didn't just provide capital, David told the audience of entrepreneurs and investors. She provided the kind of patient, strategic support that allowed me to build something sustainable rather than something flashy. The biggest mistake of my business career was treating that partnership as if it didn't matter. The smartest decision I've made since then was working to repair the relationship I had damaged through pride and ingratitude. The public acknowledgement was gratifying, but more important was the private conversation we had afterward, where David apologized not just for his business mistakes, but for the personal choices that had allowed our relationship to deteriorate. He took responsibility for excluding me from family celebrations, for allowing Sarah's social priorities to reshape his values, and for treating my emotional support as less valuable than the financial partnerships he celebrated. I want to build a different kind of relationship with you, David said during that conversation, not as someone who needs your help, and not as someone who's trying to make up for past mistakes, but as family members who respect each other and can work together because we share values and trust each other's judgment. The new partnership we've built is visible, collaborative, and based on the kind of mutual recognition that had been missing from our anonymous arrangement. David's company now acknowledges MC Holdings as a founding partner in all their marketing materials and public presentations. I attend board meetings as a recognized investor rather than communicating through legal intermediaries. Our business relationship has become a model for family partnerships that honor both independence and interdependence. Sarah's transformation has been equally significant. The crisis forced her to confront the ways her insecurities had damaged family relationships, and she has worked consistently to repair the trust she had undermined through years of subtle exclusion and social manipulation. She now organizes family gatherings that genuinely include everyone, and she has become one of my strongest advocates in social situations where people might underestimate my business capabilities. I learned that security in a relationship doesn't come from diminishing other people's importance, Sarah told me during a recent conversation. It comes from building something positive that can include everyone who matters. I'm proud to be part of a family that includes someone who has achieved what you've achieved in business and in life. The professional recognition I've received over the past 3 years reflects not just financial success, but the satisfaction of building relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. Business schools invite me to speak about family investment strategies. Industry publications feature articles about my approach to patient capital and collaborative partnerships. Other family offices seek my advice about structuring investments that support both financial returns and family relationships. But the most meaningful recognition comes from the entrepreneurs I've supported, who credit MC Holdings with enabling their success while treating our partnerships as collaborative achievements rather than charitable assistance. Marcus's educational software now serves over 10,000 students across 12 states. Jennifer's legal services firm has helped hundreds of small businesses navigate complex regulatory requirements. Maria's restaurant management system has become an industry standard for independent restaurants and small chains. Each of these success stories reflects the kind of partnership I had hoped to build with David 15 years ago. Relationships based on mutual respect, shared credit, and honest acknowledgement of each person's contributions to collective achievement. The young entrepreneur I'm mentoring now, a 26-year-old named Alex Chen, who has developed innovative solar panel installation systems for residential markets, reminds me of David during his early years. The difference is that Alex welcomes my strategic guidance, credits my contributions in his investor presentations, and treats our partnership as collaborative success rather than anonymous charity. Margaret, you've taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom, Alex said during our most recent strategy meeting. Building something meaningful requires recognizing all the sources of your success and honoring the relationships that make achievement possible. Looking back over the past 18 years, from David's initial startup capital request to my current portfolio of collaborative partnerships, I understand that the greatest transformation hasn't been financial, it's been personal. I've learned that anonymity isn't always protection, that recognition matters more than comfort, and that the most valuable investments are in relationships that honor both independence and interdependence. The dissolution of my anonymous partnership with David was painful, but necessary, forcing both of us to confront the costs of taking important relationships for granted. The reconstruction of our partnership on the foundation of honesty and mutual respect has been more rewarding than either of us anticipated. Today, when David speaks about his business success, he acknowledges the sources of that success and honors the partnerships that made it possible. When I evaluate new investment opportunities, I insist on relationships that value collaborative achievement over anonymous charity. When our family gathers for celebrations, everyone understands that success has sources, and those sources deserve recognition and respect. The thank you card from Maria Santos serves as a daily reminder that the best investments aren't just financial, they're investments in relationships that transform both partners and create something more valuable than either could achieve alone.